And we're back. Bill Whittle's Hot Mic Part 2. Today we're talking about the idea of Calexit, the move that's going on in California, and is a relatively serious movement to have California secede from the Union. And we talked earlier about some of the legal consequences of that with our guest, who's Ed Brodow. He's an analyst of California politics, and he wrote a great book called Tyranny of the Minority, How the Left is Destroying America. So, Ed, again, we're just having fun today with this. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. So if California were to pass legislation that amended their constitution and basically said, we're not part of the United States anymore, Scalia had said, as we mentioned earlier, the Civil War settled the issue of secession. Do you think that it's conceivable that the U.S. Army and Air Force would be killing Americans and bombing San Francisco? I mean, it just simply doesn't seem conceivable to me.
It's not conceivable to me either. I don't think that's in the cards. I think that's kind of an extremist way of looking at the future. Just because they would have passed that ridiculous thing about secession, you don't get to succeed just because you want to secede. You have to get the rest of the country to go along with it, and that's what you were referring to earlier. There's a procedure that has to be followed in order to do this. And I don't think they'd ever get it through that procedure.
I'm not 100% sure I agree with you on the second part. Ed, I certainly agree about the shooting being an extreme situation that's not going to happen. But I think given the reputation of California and the rest of the country, I think you could easily find 3/4 of the state that have decided, no, if you guys want to go, have a nice trip. You really think it's essentially impossible?
I don't say it's impossible. I say it's unlikely. Look, the people that are running California now, people that are running California are unable to do it. They're inept. What makes them think that they're going to be capable of doing it as a country?
That's an excellent point. You know, I got into an argument with a Democratic councilwoman who said that California was the richest state in the nation. And I said, no, by any accounting methods, California is the poorest state in the nation. The debt that California carries is enormous. And for some reason in politics, we don't look at assets and liabilities. We don't talk about income and revenues on one side and debt on the other. And this is the most indebted state in the union in terms of gross dollars. I'm quite sure that must be true.
There was a guy on Tucker Carlson's show a couple of weeks ago, and Tucker Carlson said, look, what's going to happen when all the affluent people leave California, which is happening in France for the same reason. And this man said, well, that's great. We'll just replace them with illegal aliens. as though who cares whether the people who pay for all this stuff leave or not. It's total gross, juvenile way of looking, as I said, juvenile way of looking at politics. Forget about the consequences. Forget about taking any responsibility. We'll just pass a bunch of laws. We'll give everything away. And if we can't pay for it, so what?
Yep. Juvenile, adolescent, those are perfect adjectives for this. Now, we'll just conclude with this. While there's no precedent for legal secession from the Union, as a matter of fact, there's a number of cases, of 11 during the Civil War, as I recall, where most emphatically was not the right of a state to leave the Union. Whether you agree with that or not, that was the outcome of the Civil War. But there is legal precedent for something else. And some of these I didn't know. One of them I did, but some of them I didn't know. In 1791, Vermont was created from disputed parts of the state of New York. In 1792, Kentucky split off and was formed from parts of Virginia. North Carolina ceded land to federal territories that eventually became Tennessee. Georgia ceded land that eventually became the state of Alabama. The Missouri Compromise in 1820 split Maine off from Massachusetts. And, of course, the one that everybody should know, 1863, West Virginia is created as a new state and readmitted to the Union in the middle of the Civil War. So, if California cannot leave the Union, can California at least turn into more than one state? And as it turns out, there are a number of serious propositions to do that too. One of them is called Six Californias. And Six Californias would basically take the state of California and its enormous population and divide it essentially roughly into interest groups so that instead of having 50 electoral college votes, each one of these might have 10 or 8 or whatever the case may be. And California would no longer be the monolith that you talked about earlier, Ed. How do you like the idea of 6 Californias or 3 or 12? Do you think that's feasible? And do you think that gives you a sense of getting your vote back as a conservative in California?
Well, that's the first thought that occurred to me when you said that. I think it's more feasible than outright secession. And it might actually make sense for the state because as it is in Sacramento, they can't manage their affairs. So maybe if we took a lot of the power away from Sacramento and we split it up, it might result in much better fiscal management.
Well, it would certainly mean that the huge red patches of California, which are relatively sparsely populated compared to the dark blue city centers, it would mean that tens of millions of Californians would have they'd have a realistic chance of having some kind of say in their own destiny, right? If you're a Republican in California, you know that your vote for president and essentially your vote for Congress and Senate, certainly for Senate and president, is essentially never going to count. That's how heavily politicized California is. It would be nice, don't you think, to be able to control your own destiny? And this may be the only way to do it.
Well, I think it would depend on how you carved up the state, because you could carve it up in a way that it wouldn't matter, or it might even favor the blue votes. So it would all depend on how they gerrymander it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That's exactly right. It's all fun. It's all speculation. But again, it's not a joke. There are people trying to pass this legislation right now in the state of California. So it's something we want to keep an eye on, even if it's just for the sake of amusement. Ed Brodow is our guest. Go ahead.
I have a proposal of my own, if you'd like to hear it. My proposal is that California should merge with Venezuela, and then all the socialists can enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, and then Californians can eventually be reduced to going to the zoo not to see the animals but to eat them. That's what's happening in Venezuela now. If you're an animal lover and you think socialism is great, Hugo Chavez has made Venezuela the kind of place where people are catching and eating dogs and cats off the streets now with all these oil reserves. Ed Brodow, thanks very much for joining us today. Ed's a California analyst, former U.S. Marine. He's written a great book called Tyranny of the Minority, How the Left is Destroying America. Thanks for joining us today, Ed. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Bill.
So, what does all this mean? Mostly, it doesn't mean anything. Mostly, it's a giant temper tantrum. Ed said it. I've used the word adolescent, childish, infantile, all of that. A lot of it is simply people who cannot stand the idea that they lost this election, that they believed that they would win. And by the way, they didn't just think that Hillary was going to win. The people that thought that Hillary was going to win thought that Democrats were going to win forever. Forever. Barack Obama governed as if the Democrats were going to be in power forever. Turns out that the American people said, no, we want to give that a second thought. So the people who are calling for the exit of California from the Union are essentially people who are stomping their feet at the result of an election that they lost, despite California being mightily contributing to Hillary Clinton's vote. Matter of fact, if you take California out of the current election, Donald Trump wins the popular vote as well. Hillary Clinton's margin of popular vote victory, was due to California. So essentially, it's not really a very serious thing. But as I said, thinking about it is a serious thing. The fact that people in California, these progressives, these far left-wing individuals who do nothing but try to consolidate power and put it in one place, who thought they'd be putting it in the hands of a Washington run by Hillary Clinton, they are now realizing that maybe they don't like the federal government having that much control over their lives now that Donald Trump is president. They're starting to think about how come we have to listen to what this guy in Washington says? We don't agree with him on anything. What they don't realize is those very thoughts are the exact thoughts that the founders of this country had to identify and deal with and come up with a solution for. a two-part Congress, one part representing the people, another house representing the states. The progressives destroyed the state house, the Senate, in the 17th Amendment, and here we are in the trouble we're in. I think the best solution is very simple. I would just create a new constitutional amendment, and I'd repeal both of them. 16th and 17th Amendment are hereby repealed. That would get us a long way towards freedom and happiness. I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on the Hot Mic Show right here on NRATV.